A powerful millionaire thought he could outsmart the system, but he didn't count on facing a judge who couldn't be bought. Behind every dollar he stole were real families shattered by greed. This is the story of how justice caught up with Blake Thornton and made sure the whole world was watching. The courtroom was packed, elbow to elbow, shoulder to shoulder, alive with murmurs that buzzed like a swarm of restless bees. Reporters fidgeted in their seats, sketching out potential headlines before the first word had even been spoken. People leaned in close to whisper rumors they'd picked up from the internet, the news, or someone who knew someone who had once done business with him. But the moment he walked in, the chatter faltered. Blake Thornton, age 48, entered with the kind of presence that could silence a room. Not because of reverence, but because of sheer disbelief. He wasn't just a man under fire, he was a symbol of greed, of arrogance, of what happens when unchecked power goes too far. He looked like he belonged at a Fortune 500 gala, not the defendant's table in a federal courtroom. His silver hair was slicked back with precision, his tailored charcoal suit hugged his broad frame, and the smug curl of his lip suggested he wasn't there to be judged, he was there to perform. Thornton took his seat slowly, as if the entire affair was beneath him. He flipped open a leather-bound legal pad, jotted something with a Mont Blanc pen, and ignored the eyes boring into him from all directions. His lawyer leaned in to whisper something, but Blake simply waved a hand, dismissing him like a waiter who'd brought the wrong wine. That's when the bailiff's voice rang out. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Naomi Harris." Chairs scraped the floor as everyone stood, but Blake remained seated. He didn't even flinch. He sat there like he owned the courthouse, like the people in the room were there for a business pitch, not the trial of the decade. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. A cameraman at the back muttered, "Did he really just stay seated?" While others exchanged glances, unsure whether to be shocked or just disgusted. Then she entered. Judge Naomi Harris, black, brilliant and utterly unshakable, walked in with a quiet authority that needed no introduction. In her mid-50s, her braided hair framed a face carved from discipline and experience. She didn't command the room with theatrics. She didn't need to. Her presence alone was enough to shift the energy. Every attorney in the building knew when Judge Harris took the bench, nonsense wouldn't be tolerated. She had built her name from the ground up, from a childhood in Baton Rouge to law school in Chicago to a public defender's office where she spent years fighting for voices no one wanted to hear. She knew justice didn't come easy, and she wasn't about to let Blake Thornton make a mockery of it. Her eyes scanned the room, briefly settling on the man who hadn't risen. If she was fazed, she didn't show it. "You may be seated," she said firmly, her voice as composed as a steel gavel. She didn't address Blake's blatant disrespect, not yet. But every single person in that courtroom knew she'd seen it, and no one doubted she would remember. The charges against Blake were severe: wire fraud, conspiracy, securities fraud, and obstruction of justice. Thornton Capital, his pride and joy, his so-called empire, had turned out to be nothing more than a glammed-up Ponzi scheme. He had preyed on working families, retirees, and small business owners, spinning lies dressed up as opportunity. He'd stood before church congregations and community halls, flashing charts, statistics, and charming smiles. He had promised safety, growth, a legacy to pass down. But beneath it all was rot. Now the truth was unraveling, slowly, painfully, publicly. In the front row sat Tanya Ramirez, 39 years old, a mother of 3 who had invested every last penny of her savings into Thornton's scheme. A single mother working double shifts at a nursing home, she'd believed Blake's promise that her investment would grow and help send her children to college. Instead, her home had been foreclosed on. She had spent nights in the back seat of a borrowed van, her children huddled in sleeping bags beside her. Next to her sat Clarence Boyd, a 64-year-old retired firefighter who had watched his pension disappear into thin air. He had spent 3 decades running into burning buildings without hesitation, only to find himself living in his brother's spare bedroom, wondering how he'd afford heart medication next month. His jaw clenched tight every time he looked toward the defense table, as if daring Blake to meet his eyes. But Blake didn't look at them. He never did. To him, they weren't people. They were data points, collateral damage, collapsed rows on a spreadsheet. As the prosecution began laying out the foundation of their case, detailing the staggering number of victims, nearly 1,000, alongside the tens of millions siphoned off into shell companies, offshore accounts, and luxury assets, Blake remained unbothered. He occasionally took notes, sometimes smirked, and at one point even stifled a yawn when the prosecution displayed a slide showing the list of known victims, names, ages, hometowns. Blake leaned back in his chair and whispered something to his lawyer that made them both chuckle. A reporter from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution scribbled down one word: unrepentant. Judge Harris listened carefully, occasionally raising an eyebrow, but never letting her expression reveal too much. That was her power, never giving the defense a hint of what she was thinking. But those who knew her understood the storm that brewed behind her calm. The most chilling part wasn't the evidence, it was Blake's attitude. His entire demeanor screamed, "This won't stick. I've walked away from worse. The rules aren't made for people like me," and maybe that had been true. Until now. The courtroom took a break for lunch, and as the crowd began to disperse, one elderly woman in the back leaned over to her daughter and whispered, "He don't even know what's coming. Judge Harris ain't the one." Outside the courthouse, protesters held signs that read "Justice for the people" and "No more financial predators." Families of victims gathered in huddled groups, comforting one another while reporters angled for sound bites. But inside, in the cool silence of the courtroom, the tension was only beginning to build. Blake Thornton believed he was untouchable, that his wealth, charm, and an army of high-pressed attorneys would insulate him from the consequences of his greed. He had lived a life of unchecked power, manipulating lives without remorse, erasing futures with a stroke of a pen. But Judge Naomi Harris wasn't interested in charm. She wasn't intimidated by luxury, and she had no patience for men who built empires on broken promises. As the afternoon session resumed, all eyes returned to the bench and the man who sat before it. And for the first time there was the faintest shift in Blake's posture. Not fear, not yet, but confusion, like he couldn't quite understand why the usual tricks weren't working. What he didn't realize was that this courtroom wasn't like the boardrooms he used to dominate. This time, the power didn't belong to him, it belonged to the law, and to a judge who had waited her whole career for a case like this. One that would remind the world that justice isn't a luxury reserved for the rich, it's a right. And Blake Thornton, he was about to learn that the hard way. The courtroom had never felt heavier. After the thunderous start to the trial, the afternoon air inside the chamber had settled into something tighter, more suffocating. Gone was the buzz of speculation and nervous whispers. In its place sat a tension that gripped the room like a storm cloud refusing to break. The gallery remained full. Locals, victims, reporters, even former investors in expensive suits, who looked like they were trying to disappear into their own collars. Everyone had a reason to be there. Everyone was waiting to see how far this would go. And sitting front and center, wearing that same smug expression like he was watching a poorly written play, was Blake Thornton. He hadn't changed. He hadn't cracked. Even after being hit with the reality of charges that could lock him away for a quarter century, he carried himself with the same unsettling calm. Like the rules still didn't apply. Like this courtroom, with its high ceilings and oak-paneled walls, was just another temporary inconvenience between yachts and golf courses. Judge Naomi Harris took the bench again, her expression unreadable. She adjusted her glasses once, her gaze scanning the room with the same quiet power she had carried in since the start of this trial. The same gaze that told everyone watching, "I'm not here for the theatrics. I'm here for the truth." The prosecution wasted no time. The first witness was called. Tonya Ramirez. When she stood, the gallery stilled. She walked with measured steps, shoulders squared, but you could see it in her eyes, pain that hadn't healed, not even close. She took the oath, sat down, and folded her hands. Her voice, when it came, was soft but unwavering. "I believed in him," she said, nodding once in Blake's direction. "I believed him when he said my money would work for me. I put in everything I had. My savings, my emergency fund, the account my mother left me." Her voice caught slightly, but she continued. 6 months later, my bank account was empty. My mortgage went into default. My kids," she paused, swallowed hard, "my kids slept in the back of our car in the Walmart parking lot for 13 nights. In the gallery, someone gasped. A tear rolled down the cheek of an older woman in the back row. "Blake?" He didn't blink. He just shifted in his seat and leaned back like he was waiting for a commercial break. Tonya kept speaking, describing her descent from hard-working single mum to homeless, broken and humiliated. "He didn't just take my money," she said. "He took our dignity." The courtroom was silent when she stepped down, except for the soft scrape of her shoes across the tile. Then came Clarence Boyd. He moved slower, with the stiffness of age and injury, his firefighter's badge pinned to the lapel of his jacket. He didn't speak right away. He just looked at Blake long and hard, and then turned to the judge. "I spent 31 years running into buildings that other people ran out of," he said, voice deep, gravelly. "I saved lives, pulled children from smoke and flame. I did my job with honor. I trusted Mr. Thornton with everything I'd worked for because he promised me security. He promised I could retire without worry. He promised I could live out the rest of my days in peace." His hands trembled. "I live in my brother's basement now. I sold my truck. I stopped taking half my medication because I can't afford it. And the man responsible for that sits there, smirking." The gallery turned, and sure enough, Blake was scrolling on his phone. Judge Harris's gaze sharpened. "Mr. Thornton," she said, voice low but cutting, "put the phone down." Blake glanced up. "I was just checking something important, Your Honor." "Now," she said again, and this time there was iron behind every syllable. Blake hesitated, then set the phone face down on the table. The moment passed, but the damage lingered. Next, the prosecution unveiled its most damning evidence, a series of internal emails obtained from a former Thornton Capital executive turned whistleblower. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the projector lit up the wall. There, in bold, were Blake's own words. "Don't worry about the actual numbers. Dress 'em up. These folks aren't analysts. They're desperate. Make it sparkle and they'll sign." The crowd shifted. Murmurs rose. Clarence clenched his jaw. Tonya wiped a tear with a tissue balled tightly in her fist. Another email. "If the feds start sniffing around, we blame the brokers. They're the buffer." And another. "These investors are a dime a dozen. We can lose a few." The room sat stunned, every word more venomous than the last. The prosecutor turned, quiet fury burning in her tone. "Mr. Thornton," she said, "do you deny sending these emails?" Blake leaned forward into the microphone, that same condescending drawl curling from his lips. "Those were internal strategies, business talk. If we start criminalizing ambition, we'll have to shut down half of Wall Street." His smirk returned. "I'm not the villain here. I'm the scapegoat." Gasps. Disbelief. Even the court reporter stopped typing for a moment. Judge Harris's gavel struck like thunder. "Order," she said, rising slightly from her chair. "This is a court of law, not a boardroom. Mr. Thornton, I suggest you recalibrate your tone." Blake shrugged, as if none of it mattered, as if every testimony, every tear, every ruined life laid bare before him were nothing more than a formality before his inevitable acquittal. But something had shifted. The gallery felt it, the jury felt it, and most importantly, Judge Harris felt it. She said nothing more that day, but her silence was loud. It wrapped itself around the courtroom like a slow-building storm. The trial continued. Witness after witness stepped forward, each one a thread in a tapestry of devastation. A small business owner who lost the restaurant he built with his father, a teacher forced into bankruptcy, a widow whose entire pension vanished days before her surgery. And through it all, Blake never faltered. He rolled his eyes, whispered to his legal team, even smirked at a reporter as he was led out for recess. He thought he was winning. He thought his indifference was armor, but in truth, it was fuel. Judge Harris never raised her voice. She didn't have to. Her control over the room came not from volume, but from presence. She let Blake show exactly who he was, day after day, minute by minute. She didn't interrupt his arrogance. She documented it. She let the jury see what justice looks like when it waits. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a judge can do isn't to stop the storm. It's to let the lightning strike exactly where it should. By the end of the second week, the prosecution rested its case. The defense tried to spin a new narrative, Blake as a misunderstood genius, a man targeted by jealous regulators and overzealous media. They brought in financial experts with polished shoes and memorized scripts, but it didn't stick. The jury had seen too much. The gallery had felt too much. And Judge Harris? She had waited long enough. The trial was no longer about financial statements or investment portfolios. It was about people, about decency, about what happens when those at the top believe they're above the very laws that protect everyone else. Blake Thornton still thought he could charm his way out, still believed his net worth outweighed the truth, but every sigh, every smirk, every dismissive glance was carved into the memory of that courtroom. And with every passing day, the question looming in the minds of everyone watching wasn't if he'd be punished. It was how hard he would fall. By the time the final day of the trial arrived, the tension inside the courtroom wasn't just thick. It was electric. It pulsed through the benches, tightened every breath, and made every sound feel sharper, heavier. The same people who had filled the gallery each day, survivors, spectators, skeptics, were back in full force, their eyes trained not on the witnesses anymore, but on the bench where the final word would be spoken. Cameras clicked and reporters whispered frantically into phones. Families clutched each other's hands. Blake Thornton walked in wearing the same tailored arrogance as always, this time paired with a pale blue silk tie and a faint smirk that hadn't faded across the 3 long weeks of trial. He adjusted his cufflinks like he was preparing for a photo shoot instead of sentencing. He didn't look like a man who was about to face justice. He looked like a man who still believed he was above it. But what he didn't understand, even now, was that this courtroom didn't belong to him. It belonged to the people he had hurt, and above all, it belonged to the woman seated high above it all, Judge Naomi Harris. She entered quietly, robes sweeping, expression carved from stone. Her gaze didn't search the room for sympathy or validation. It landed squarely on the defendant, and in that look was everything. Authority, memory, and a level of patience that had finally, fully run out. "Mr. Thornton," she began, voice low and steady, "please rise." Blake did so, slowly, shoulders back, still playing the part. He even glanced toward the cameras in the back with the faintest nod, like he was about to deliver a campaign speech. But Judge Harris didn't blink. "You have been found guilty," she continued, "on all counts of wire fraud, securities fraud, conspiracy to defraud investors, and obstruction of justice. The evidence presented over the course of this trial has been not only substantial but damning. You constructed an empire built on deceit, disguised as opportunity. You stole millions from honest, hard-working people, many of whom sat here day after day, forced to relive their pain in front of the very man who caused it." Blake's jaw tightened just slightly. His lawyer stared forward, frozen. The gallery was silent, breathless. "You called your victims desperate," the judge went on, her voice still calm but colder now. "You referred to them as suckers, and you instructed your employees to falsify documents, conceal risks, and silence whistleblowers. You knew exactly what you were doing. And throughout this entire process, you've shown no remorse, no accountability, only arrogance." Behind him, Tonya Ramirez sat with her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Clarence Boyd stared forward, unmoving, but his jaw was set like stone. "Justice," Judge Harris said, her voice rising slightly now, "is not about vengeance. It is not about spectacle. It is about responsibility. And you, Mr. Thornton, have avoided that responsibility your entire life. But today it arrives." She paused, just for a moment, just long enough for the weight of her words to settle into every ear. "I hereby sentence you to 25 years in federal prison," she declared, "without the possibility of parole." The words echoed through the chamber like a bell tolling at the end of an era. Blake Thornton blinked. His expression froze. The smirk dropped from his face like a curtain falling on a failed performance. The silence that followed was deafening. "Furthermore," Judge Harris continued, her tone turning sharper, "I am ordering the immediate liquidation of your personal and business assets, including your real estate holdings, luxury vehicles, investment portfolios, and offshore accounts, to be distributed as restitution to the verified victims of your crimes. Every dollar stolen, every home lost, every retirement erased will be honored, because these people deserve more than your apologies. They deserve action." Blake's face drained of color. He turned sharply toward his attorney, who had nothing. No response, no strategy, no escape hatch left to pull. Blake's voice cracked for the first time in weeks. "You can't do this," he muttered, louder now, his voice breaking into a shout. "I'm Blake Thornton. You can't treat me like some common bailiffs," Judge Harris said, her voice a whipcrack of finality. "Take him out. This is a joke," Blake howled as two uniformed officers approached. "I'll appeal this. I'll ruin your name, Judge. I'll—" But his voice was swallowed up by the sound of applause, loud, sustained, and rolling like thunder from the back of the courtroom to the front. It wasn't planned. It wasn't polite. It was the sound of grief releasing, the sound of justice arriving. It was, in that moment, the most honest expression the room had ever seen. Judge Harris let it happen for a few seconds. Then she raised her hand, and like a conductor quieting a symphony, the room settled. "Let this be known," she said, her voice soft but clear, "that no one, no matter how powerful, no matter how wealthy, is beyond the reach of the law." She stood then, her gavel in hand. "Court is adjourned." It was over, but the story wasn't. Outside, cameras swarmed. Headlines blasted across every screen. Thornton sentenced to 25 years, assets seized. Reporters pushed microphones toward victims, hungry for quotes. But Tanya Ramirez didn't speak right away. She stepped down the courthouse steps slowly, her eyes scanning the sky as if it might somehow look different. When she finally answered a reporter's question, "How do you feel?" her voice was almost a whisper. "Relieved," she said. "But the truth is, no sentence can undo what he did to my family. We're still healing, but at least now we're not invisible anymore." Clarence Boyd leaned on the railing nearby, nodding to himself. "It's not just about the prison time," he told a local news station. "It's about the message, that people like him, people who think they can play God with someone's future, don't get to walk away untouched anymore." Inside the courthouse, Judge Naomi Harris stood alone in her chambers, staring out the window at the press and the crowds gathering below. She didn't smile. She didn't pump a fist in triumph. She simply breathed, deeply, slowly, because for her, this wasn't about headlines. It wasn't about winning. It was about something harder, something lonelier, and something far more important. Doing what was right, no matter who sat across the bench. A week later, a small letter arrived in a pale pink envelope, addressed simply to Judge Harris. It was from Sofia Ramirez, Tonya's youngest daughter. Inside was a neatly folded page with hand-drawn stars around the edges and handwriting that tilted slightly to the right. "Thank you for standing up for us," it read. "Thank you for showing me that people like him don't get to win. You didn't just give us justice. You gave us hope." Judge Harris read the note twice, then she placed it in the drawer of her desk, on top of all the case files, the transcripts, the motions, because in the end, that one letter said more than any legal document ever could. The fall of Blake Thornton was more than just a trial. It was a reckoning, a reminder. that greed leaves scars, but truth can still heal, that arrogance may roar, but justice, true justice, moves quietly, steadily, until it stands at the door and demands to be heard. And if you were sitting in that courtroom that day, or even just watching from home, maybe you felt it too, that shift in the air, that deep exhale of a nation tired of watching the powerful walk away. Justice had spoken, loud enough for the world to hear, and it echoed far beyond those courtroom walls. Sometimes justice arrives not with a roar, but with a steady voice and unwavering resolve. The story of Blake Thornton is more than just the tale of a man who believed himself untouchable. It's a reminder of what happens when pride, power, and greed go unchecked. He lived in a world where money was armor and arrogance was currency, but in the end, the very system he thought he could manipulate held him accountable, and it did so not with spectacle, but with purpose. What we learn from this story is painfully simple. No one, no matter how powerful or polished, should be above the law. And those who suffer in silence, the Tonya Ramirezes, the Clarence Boyds, the countless unseen victims, deserve to be heard, to be believed, and most importantly, to be made whole. Justice may not always arrive on time, but when it comes, it can be the very thing that restores dignity to the broken and hope to the hopeless. Judge Naomi Harris showed us that strength isn't always loud. It's not about vengeance or anger. It's about staying true to what's right, even when the world expects you to flinch. She didn't just sentence a man, she sent a message. Character still matters, integrity still matters, and when justice speaks, we should all be listening. So if you've ever felt small in the face of someone else's power, if you've ever been told your voice doesn't matter, remember this: systems can be flawed, but truth still has power. And when people stand up, when they tell their stories, when they demand accountability, change happens. Real change. To everyone who has followed this story with us, thank you. From the bottom of my heart, and from all of us here at US Justice Story, we're honored that you choose to spend your time with us, listening, reflecting, remembering. These stories are not just about courtrooms. They're about all of us, our rights, our resilience, and the reminder that even when the odds feel stacked against you, justice isn't just a dream, it's possible. If this story moved you, inspired you, or simply made you think, we invite you to subscribe, share, and join us again, because as long as there's injustice in the world, there will be stories to tell, and we promise to keep telling them. Until next time, take care of yourself and each other, and never stop believing in the power of truth.